Welcome to Coruzant Technologies, home of the Digital Executive Podcast. Do you work in emerging tech, working on something innovative, maybe an entrepreneur? Apply to be a guest at www.coruzant.com/brand. Welcome to the Digital Executive. Today's guest is Antonio Mallia. Antonio Mallia, founder and CEO of Celts.ai, believes today's web search infrastructure was built for humans, not AI agents. As organizations deploy increasingly autonomous systems, the quality, freshness, and speed of retrieval becomes a strategic differentiator. Celts explores why many AI teams are moving beyond traditional search APIs and what it really means to build a retrieval stack from first principles, and whether search for agents could become as important over the next decade as search for people was over the last 20 years. Well, good afternoon, Antonio. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, my friend. I appreciate it, especially making the time today. I know generally your office is based in San Francisco, but you're in Italy currently. So I know you had to traverse some time zones and calendars to get here, and I always appreciate that. So thank you. And Antonio, let's jump into your first question. Your path runs from the University of Pisa's deep information retrieval tradition through a PhD at New York University to research roles at Amazon, Pinecone, and Bloomberg. And you've said the idea for Celts crystallized while building Alexa's question answering engine at Amazon, when it hit you that the consumer of search was no longer a human, but a machine. How did that realization pull you from research into founding a company, and why was that the right moment to build it?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Actually, I'm currently in Pisa and I want to start from where it originated. Pisa's been a great place, a great university to pretty much have students becoming passionate about information retrieval and web search in general. And that's where I started, and where I come back to find more people like me are passionate about information retrieval. And, there are many young talents coming out of university, coming out of their, research program from school, that they want to join companies like Celts, where we are actually going to apply these studies into something very, very concrete. And through that, starting from Pisa, from my original studies, going to NYU, doing a PhD specifically on information retrieval, and in particular on efficiency for web search, I realized that this was a problem where people were getting comfortable in a way. It was what is called sometimes a solved problem. So nothing new was coming out of the further optimizations. Until Transformers came out in 2019, more or less, and Orbis, when they got more popular. And pretty much search has changed dramatically. Many things have changed since then. At the time I was at Amazon, and we were building a web search engine specifically for Alexa, which, if you think about it, this is before LLMs, before the generative era. And Alexa was really reading sentences from the web page to answer some of the users' questions. So it started to be clear that the next tool that is going to be leveraging search was not going to be anymore like a human. And so now, at the time it was Alexa, this robotic device, right? But now things have moved towards being more LLMs and agentic workflows. And so after spending a couple of years at Pinecone, which was a very AI native company, I realized AI is really the way web search is going to be fully exploited. And so decided to start Celts with pretty much past colleagues from Amazon, past colleagues from research and academia. And now we are a team of 15 people, very, very passionate about this specific topic.
That's awesome. Love the backstory. Obviously, the genesis of everything started in Pisa, where you're at right now, and your curiosity and interest in information retrieval, I thought was interesting. And obviously that fuels your passion around this particular topic in industry and technology, but you were determined to solve a bigger problem here in search. And I thought that was interesting. You're making more search, obviously more accurate, more human relatable, and really that improve that customer experience. So I appreciate that. Antonio, rather than wrapping Google, Bing, or Brave like most AI search products, Celts took the hard path of owning its own retrieval pipeline. Crawling, extraction, indexing, retrieval, ranking, all that. You've conceded that web scale search is one of the most capital intensive problems in software. Why was owning the full stack non-negotiable for you? And how do you justify that much harder path to investors and customers?
Yeah, it's been actually quite a very nice experience to see a product shaping out from nothing, like building everything from scratch. And I think now it's very clear to investors and customers why this makes a difference. And I can tell you more about it very soon. But like at the very beginning, obviously this wasn't clear, and it was kind of like hard to justify why not do what everybody else was doing, which is wrapping Google Bing or Pray. Now, regardless of like if this is something that people should do or are allowed to do to wrap like an existing tool to sell a product, I think that poses like some limitation on the product itself. You're pretty much like building as an output, like your interface, your dynamic, right? Like it's really pretty much like shaped around something that existed before. And that was built actually for humans again. Google, Bing, or Brave, they literally built a web search engine in the traditional way, meaning like ranking is extremely important. So the position of every document in the top 10 results that people retrieve is actually significant, meaning that a person would go top to bottom, will read the first snippet, go down to the second one, and then eventually, like at some point, stop and decide that maybe that query wasn't right, and they're gonna like rephrase it. And so there is a concept of kind of like patient in a way, patient in looking at these results in ranked order. With LLMs, this is not a thing anymore. Ranking doesn't really matter because an LLM is gonna read all the context, regardless if it's at the beginning or at the end, in kind of like the same way, in a very eager way of extracting information, understanding the context. And so the way we built and the way we are still improving and building our engine is more focused on for that type of customer. Meaning like, ranking is obviously important in a global way. I mean, like how do you get to extract, let's say, the top 10 documents that are more relevant for generating some context? So ranking is important to pretty much like consider those, the top documents that would be able to provide context and allow the LLM to answer the question. But the ranking within the result set is not a thing anymore because everything is going to be consumed. Moreover, like one other thing that we looked at when we were sort of like deciding how the shape of our API should look like is like the content itself. Snippets, which is what traditional search engines return to user. They are extremely valuable for humans in the sense that they can be very short as long as they are informative about what the user, the person is going to find inside the web page after clicking the link. So truncated sentences are fine because they give you like an idea of what is going to be inside, even without giving the full information, even without answering to your query or question. But this is not okay for an LLM because a truncated sentence, so something that ends up with ... right, is gonna invite the in a way to kind of come up with the rest of the sentence without actually knowing that information. So, a solution to that is clearly to provide either the full content or very dense snippets or paragraph where pretty much like you don't have sentences that are truncated. You make sure that the sentence itself contains the information that the LLM is looking for. And so it's really like a different way of thinking about, ranking, the way you present the results, the way an LLM surfaces these results. Now, another interesting aspect about this is that LLMs, AI, models in general, robots, if you wish, they query in a very different way. Like the input to our search API, for example, is actually quite different from an input that a human, could insert. In fact, humans are usually bounded by the number of tokens that they insert. In a way, like people like to write short queries. to be a little bit ambiguous in the way they formulate the query. And maybe they will refine it afterwards, right? But like the first attempt is like a very, very simple generic query that is hard to fully understand from a retrieval perspective. LLMs are completely different. They like to write very long queries. Sometimes these long queries, they even look like a passage, a sentence. They're also very, very specific. They pretty much know what they need and they will go and nail the specific topic. So if you think about like a web search engine, building a web search engine, there are things that you have to prioritize over others. To give an example, is like you probably don't really need spell correction if the input is coming from an LLM, because it's rarely gonna mess up with the query. But it's way more important to produce the right content for the LLM, the right context, such that it can extract the right information to take eventually like an action, produce an answer, etc. Finally, the other interesting thing to consider when we're building like sites, we thought a lot about this, is like, what about the content? Most of these LLMs are being trained already with the content that is present on the web. In fact, the pre-training phase of an LLM is actually done by looking at open source crawled version of the internet. So now if they had the chance to look at these documents in detail, what is the point of repurposing it to them at runtime when a query comes in? Most of the time, they in fact memorize some of these the information contained in the more kind of like knowledge dense parts of the web. I think, and we are seeing this with our customers. These LLMs care about a fraction of the web more than everything. So building a very scaled up version of a search engine, like as it could be Google today with trillions of pages indexed, won't make a lot of sense for an LLM, in the sense that there is probably no need to have every single page on the internet to be indexed, right? And instead, we try to focus on the things that bring more value to our customers. So to give an example, LLMs are not great at memorizing tables, numbers, headcounts, any type of like value that is A, subject to change, or B, it comes within some context. So it's really, really difficult to memorize, and it's in a structure that is not easy for LLMs the way they are architected, right? To be memorized. So we tend to index and leverage a lot of like this type of data that contains either tables or financial reports or things that are harder to be embedded in the model weights, or documents that usually web crawlers in the traditional sense don't reach, don't crawl. And those are like, I was mentioning financial reports, like typically like SEC filings, for example, are not leveraged in depth, or at least not enough. And so LLMs, they clearly need to access them at runtime because they are subject to change, they are fresh, and so they want to stay up to date. But also by searching on a standard search engine and looking at the snippet, it will be really, really hard to extract the information that, a potentially very long and complex financial report record could contain. And then finally, obviously, as I was mentioning, freshness is the number one feature that search engine or built for AI should focus on, because this is really sort of like something that there is a cutoff, something that the LLM hasn't seen in training ever. And so they need to stay up to date. It's really the only way to do this continual learning as of now, at least. And so pretty much like keep the LLM and the model up to date. So for all these reasons, we decided to build it from scratch. We also decided that we are never going to have a fallback using one of the traditional search engines. And those are like our core principle.
Thank you. Appreciate that. You unpacked quite a bit there, but what some of my takeaway notes here, you're proud and excited about building this robust platform from the ground up, taking a separate path that most others typically wouldn't take. The traditional search is all about ranking and the things that list items in a numerical rank sequence, but you're doing this differently, obviously using search AI. Everything will be available, making this much more robust and a better user experience. And again, just love what you're doing, building this again, just from scratch, doing this the right way and ensuring that searches are relevant and meaningful when users are doing that. So I appreciate that. And Antonio, wrapping up here, you've framed the big question as whether search for agents could become as important over the next decade as search for people was over the last 20 years. If you're right, what does the world look like when most web retrieval is machine to machine? And what has to be built technically and commercially for the future to fully arrive?
Yeah, I mean, I personally see a world where, most of this is going to be machine to machine. And as we are seeing, the number of sort of like the query load, the number of queries issued by machines are growing up very rapidly. In particular, because if you think about it, like the population using web search is in the end limited, and we have we can submit a certain amount of queries per year. And pretty much we reached that plateau. In fact, in the past 5 years, there hasn't been like a consistent growth as it used to be in the early 2000s, right? Where everybody was approaching the web and always even more people were using search engines in a more extensive way. And so there was kind of like a spike, but that pretty much reached a plateau in the past years. What we are seeing on the other end is this AI systems pretty much submitting always more queries, and we predict that this is going to surpass the number of queries submitted by humans in an exponential way, meaning that, as of today, maybe we are using, one agent per person, and we are slowly going to be offloading all our knowledge work to these AI agents. But I think in the early future, like in the close future, we will be spawning like many agents per person, right? With all of them being specialized and experts in different topics. So all these agents will absolutely need external knowledge. They will need fresh information coming. And so that is when web search will need to be built specifically for these systems with all these different expertise and with all these different requirements. I think the also number one feature that we will need to have in the future to fully arrive is really the ability to scale up web search in an unseen way, something that we have never seen before. I think the sort of like peer pressure that even large commercial search engines have seen until now, it's only going to be a fraction of what is going to be web search in a few years, when there's pretty much going to be no limits in the number of users. Because again, while we are limited as a number of people using, a number of humans using the web, I think that's not going to be the case for agents, meaning like it will pretty much scale horizontally as we do with systems. And so efficiency is pretty much going to be the number one priority for most of the companies working in this space.
Thank you. Appreciate that. That's awesome. So the web retrieval world obviously is going to evolve. I liked your insights here. It's going to be a lot of machine to machine in the future, as you mentioned. These LLMs, these AI systems, they'll be doing the queries. These queries will certainly surpass human searches exponentially. We know that. And today, we may have one agent working for us, but in the future, humans will be leveraging many agents, making today's search only a tiny fraction of what search will be like in the future. I thought that was interesting. But efficiency will be key. Obviously, that's the key now, but it's going to really be the key in the future for companies. So thank you. And Antonio, it was such a pleasure having you on today, and I look forward to speaking with you real soon.
Brian, really appreciated the times, and thank you so much again for having me. This was a very interesting conversation. I hope to be again here soon.
Bye for now.